The town of Red Hollow didn't die all at once. It bled out slow, like a gut-shot animal crawling toward shade it would never reach. Every week brought another boarded window, another family loading their lives onto a wagon and disappearing into the plains. The ones who stayed did so because they had nowhere else to go, or because they were too stubborn to admit that hope had ridden out months ago and wasn't coming back. Eleanor Voss belonged to the latter category. She stood behind the bar of the Brass Bell Saloon, wiping down glasses that hadn't held whiskey in 3 days, watching dust motes drift through the afternoon light like tiny, lazy ghosts. The saloon had been her husband's dream. James had hammered every nail himself, carved the bar top from a single piece of oak he'd hauled 200 miles. He died defending it 6 months ago, shot in the street by Caleb Rourke's men when he refused to sell for a quarter of what it was worth. The blood had washed away. The dream hadn't. You planning to polish that glass down to nothing, or you saving it for something special? Eleanor glanced up. Arthur Hales sat at his usual table by the window, a cup of coffee going cold in front of him. He was bent over like a question mark, spine curved from decades of hard labor that had worn him down to gristle and regret. His hand shook as he lifted the cup, a tremor that had started a year back and gotten worse every month. 70, if he was a day, maybe older. The kind of old that looked like it hurt. Just keeping busy, Eleanor said. She set the glass down, picked up another. Idle hands and all that. Your hands ain't idle. They're just waiting. Arthur's voice was soft, almost gentle. He had a way of speaking that made you lean in to hear him, made his words feel like they mattered, even when he was talking about nothing at all. Question is what they're waiting for. Eleanor didn't answer. She didn't need to. They both knew what was coming. Caleb Rourke wanted Red Hollow, and what Caleb Rourke wanted, he took. He'd already claimed the general store, the livery, and half the ranches within riding distance. The Brass Bell was one of the last holdouts, and Eleanor's refusal to sell had stopped being amusing to him. These days, it was just an insult that needed correcting. The front door swung open, banging against the wall hard enough to rattle the bottles behind the bar. 3 men walked in. No, swaggered in, the way predators do when they know there's nothing in the room that can hurt them. Dust and swagger and the casual cruelty of men who'd learned young that violence solved most problems and created the rest. Eleanor recognized the one in front. Danny Creek, 22 years old and mean as a snake with a headache. He wore his guns low and his confidence lower, all performance and ego wrapped around a core of something genuinely dangerous. The 2 behind him were older, harder, the kind of men who killed for money and slept fine after. Afternoon, Mrs. Voss, Danny said, grinning like he'd just told a joke only he understood. Hell of a hot day out there. Thought we'd step in for some refreshment. Bar's closed, Eleanor said. Her voice didn't shake. She was proud of that. Funny. Door was open. Danny hooked his thumbs in his belt, eyes scanning the empty room. They landed on Arthur, dismissed him, moved on. Where is everybody? This place used to have some life in it. People tend to drink less when they're scared, Eleanor said. Your boss is good at spreading that around. Danny's grin widened. Now that hurts my feelings, ma'am. Mr. Rourke's just a businessman trying to help this town reach its potential. Ain't his fault some folks are too stubborn to see opportunity when it's offered. Opportunity? Eleanor set down the glass, met his eyes straight on. That what you call murdering my husband in broad daylight? The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Danny's grin flickered, but held. That was unfortunate. Mr. Rourke felt real bad about that. Still does, which is why he's willing to make you a new offer. He pulled a folded paper from his vest, laid it on the bar. $500 for the property, the business, and all fixtures. That's generous, considering. Considering what? Considering accidents happen. Danny's voice stayed pleasant, but something ugly moved behind his eyes. Buildings burn. People get hurt. Be a shame if you ended up like James, all because you couldn't see reason. Eleanor's hands curled into fists. She wanted to throw the money in his face, wanted to scream, wanted to reach under the bar for the shotgun James had kept there and see how tough Danny Creek looked with both barrels pointed at his chest. Instead, she said, "Get out." Now, Mrs. Voss, I said, "Get out." Her voice cracked like a whip. Take your blood money and your threats and walk out that door before I lose what's left of my manners. For a moment, Danny's mask slipped. Eleanor saw the real him underneath, not just mean, but vicious. The kind of man who enjoyed hurting people, who'd grown up pulling wings off flies and graduated to pulling triggers on anything that looked at him wrong. "You're making a mistake," he said quietly. "Won't be my first." Danny held her gaze for 3 long seconds. Then he smiled again, picked up the paper, tucked it back in his vest. "Mr. Rourke's patience ain't infinite. He gave you till Friday to reconsider. After that," he shrugged. "Well, like I said, accidents happen." He turned to leave, his men following, but at the door he paused, looked back at Arthur. "You still alive, old man? I keep expecting to walk in here and find you face down in your coffee." Arthur didn't look up. His hands trembled around the cup. "Still breathing," he said softly. "For now." Danny laughed, a hard, ugly sound. "Mrs. Voss, you might want to consider hiring some actual protection instead of keeping a crippled scarecrow around for decoration. Though I suppose beggars can't be choosers." The door slammed behind them. Silence rushed in to fill the space, thick and suffocating. Eleanor found she was gripping the bar hard enough to hurt, her knuckles white. She forced herself to let go, to breathe, to pretend her heart wasn't trying to hammer its way out of her chest. "Friday," she said to no one in particular. 3 days. 2.5, Arthur corrected gently. "It's Wednesday afternoon." Eleanor laughed, but it came out wrong. Too sharp, too close to breaking. "You're right. My mistake. 2.5 days until they come back and burn this place to the ground with me in it." "They won't burn it." Arthur set down his cup. The tremor in his hands made the porcelain rattle against the saucer. "Too valuable. They'll just kill you and take the deed from your body." "Jesus, Arthur. You asked me to be honest when James died. Said you were tired of people lying to make you feel better." He looked at her then, and Eleanor felt something shift in the air, something she couldn't name. "So I'm being honest. Rourke wants this place. He'll kill you for it. And unless something changes in the next 2 days, there ain't a damn thing you can do to stop him." Eleanor sank onto the stool behind the bar. The fight drained out of her all at once, leaving only exhaustion and a fear so deep it had roots. "I know," she whispered. "I've known since they killed James, but what am I supposed to do, Arthur? Run? Let them win? This place is all I have left of him. If I walk away, it's like he died for nothing." "He died because he stood up to evil men," Arthur said quietly. "That ain't nothing. That's everything. But martyrdom don't require witnesses, Eleanor. Dead is dead, whether you die standing or running. So I should just give up." "I didn't say that." Eleanor looked at him, really looked. Beneath the trembling and the bent spine and the age that had carved itself into every line of his face, there was something else, something still and watchful and patient as stone. "What are you saying, then?" Arthur was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm saying that sometimes the only way through fire is to become something fireproof. And sometimes the person you think is weakest is just someone who learned to hide their teeth." Before Eleanor could respond, the door opened again. This time it was Martha Gibbs, the preacher's wife, clutching a basket of wash against her chest like a shield. She was pale, breathing hard, eyes wide with the particular terror of someone who'd just witnessed something they couldn't unsee. "Eleanor," she gasped. "They're coming. All of them. Rourke's gathering his whole crew at the edge of town. Someone heard him say—" She swallowed hard. "He said he's tired of waiting. Said if you won't sell, he'll take it tonight." The bottom dropped out of Eleanor's stomach. "Tonight? But he said Friday." "He lied." Martha's voice broke. "They're armed, Eleanor. 6, maybe 7 men. And Rourke—" She closed her eyes. "He's got that look. The one he had when he killed James. I'm so sorry. I tried to get the sheriff, but he won't come. Says it's a business dispute. Says he can't get involved without proof of—" "The sheriff's on Rourke's payroll," Eleanor interrupted flatly. "Has been for months. We all know it. We just don't say it out loud." Martha nodded miserably. "I brought the wagon around back. You can take it, head east to Fort Collins. My cousin lives there. She'll—" "No." The word came out harder than Eleanor intended. Martha flinched. "I'm not running," Eleanor said. Her hands had stopped shaking. Strange, that. Fear should have made them worse, but instead she felt something almost like calm settling over her, the kind of calm that comes when you've run out of choices and there's nothing left but the one you make. This is my home. My husband died defending it. I won't dishonor that by running now. Eleanor, please. Go home, Martha. Lock your doors. Don't get involved. Eleanor managed a smile that felt like broken glass. I appreciate you coming. I do. But this isn't your fight. Martha looked like she wanted to argue. Instead, she nodded once, squeezed Eleanor's hand, and fled. The door closed behind her with a soft click that sounded like a coffin lid. Eleanor turned to Arthur. You should go too. No sense in both of us dying here. Already told you, Arthur said. I don't lie to make you feel better. So I'll give you the truth one more time. You're going to die tonight if I leave. Rourke will come through that door with his men, and they'll do things that'll make you wish they'd just shot you quick, like they did James. Eleanor's stomach turned. I know. No, you don't. Arthur stood, slowly, painfully, like every joint was made of broken glass. But I do. I've seen what men like Rourke do when there's no one to stop them. I've seen women who prayed for death to come quick, and it didn't. I've seen... He stopped, closed his eyes. I've seen enough. Something in his tone made Eleanor's skin prickle. Arthur, I need you to trust me, he said quietly. I know that's asking a lot, but when they come through that door, I need you to step back, get behind the bar, and stay there no matter what you see, no matter what happens. Can you do that? Eleanor stared at him, at the trembling hands and bent spine, at the old man who could barely lift a coffee cup without spilling it. What are you going to do? What I swore I'd never do again. Arthur walked to the corner where he kept his things, a bedroll, a saddlebag, nothing much. But when he crouched beside them, his hands moved with sudden sureness, and when he stood again, he was holding something wrapped in oilcloth. He laid it on the table, unwrapped it slowly, almost reverently. 2 revolvers gleamed in the dusty light. They were beautiful in the way that deadly things sometimes are, perfectly balanced, meticulously maintained, the kind of weapons that had been fired so many times they'd become extensions of the hands that held them. Eleanor felt her breath catch. Where did you... Buried part of myself a long time ago, Arthur said softly, staring at the guns like they were old friends he'd hoped never to see again. Thought I was done. Thought I could just fade away quiet, work honest, die clean, maybe earn back a fraction of what I took. He looked up at her, and for the first time Eleanor saw past the tremor and the age to something colder underneath. Something that had never stopped watching, never stopped waiting. But then I met your husband, Arthur continued. Good man, reminded me what I was trying to become. And when they killed him, I thought about digging these up then. But he wouldn't have wanted that. He believed in law, in justice, in doing things right. And now? Now the law's bought, and justice is dead, and doing things right will get you killed. Arthur picked up one of the revolvers. His hand didn't shake, not even a tremor. So I'm going to do things wrong, one last time, and then I'm going to bury these guns again and pray I never see them after tonight. Eleanor felt like the floor had shifted beneath her. Who are you? Someone who made mistakes, Arthur said. Someone who's trying to make fewer of them. Now get behind that bar and stay there. What's coming next ain't something you need to see up close. Outside, the sound of horses. Multiple riders, moving fast. Arthur set the first revolver on the table, picked up the second, checked the cylinder with hands that were suddenly steady, suddenly sure. 6 rounds in each gun, 12 shots. Arthur, Eleanor whispered, there are 7 of them. He smiled then, a small, sad expression that held decades of things he'd never say out loud. I know, he said. I won't need 12. The door exploded inward. Caleb Rourke came through first, and he didn't bother with pleasantries. He was a big man, 6'3" and wide through the shoulders, with eyes like a shark's, flat and empty and interested only in what you looked like dying. Behind him came Danny Creek and 5 others, all armed, all grinning with the particular anticipation of men about to do violence and get away with it. Mrs. Voss, Rourke said pleasantly, I believe we have unfinished business. Eleanor backed toward the bar. Her heart was trying to tear itself apart. She wanted to scream, to run, to do anything except stand there while death walked through her door wearing a smile. But she'd promised Arthur. So she stepped behind the bar and waited. Rourke's eyes swept the room. Found Arthur standing by the table, old and bent and trembling. "You're still here," Rourke said, sounding genuinely surprised. "I figured you'd have crawled off to die somewhere by now." Arthur didn't respond. He just stood there, hands at his sides, looking small and frail and utterly insignificant. Danny Creek laughed. "Christ, Caleb, the old man can barely stand. This her protection? This is what she's counting on?" The other men joined in. The laughter filled the saloon like poisoned gas, cruel and cutting. They spread out, encircling Eleanor and Arthur, 6 wolves and a shark closing in on prey too weak to run. "I'll make this simple," Rourke said, pulling a folded paper from his coat. "You sign this deed over to me right now, tonight, and I'll make it quick. Painless. You won't suffer. But if you make me wait, if you make me ask twice, say—" He smiled, and it was the ugliest thing Eleanor had ever seen. "Well, my boys have been on the trail a long time. They get restless. And I ain't in the mood to tell them no when they ask for entertainment." One of the men, a scarred brute with dead eyes, licked his lips. "Been a while since we had us a woman," he said. "I vote we take our time either way." Eleanor's stomach heaved. She gripped the edge of the bar so hard her fingers went numb. "Last chance," Rourke said, extending the paper. "Sign or scream, your choice." Arthur spoke. His voice cut through the laughter like a blade through silk. Quiet, but with an edge that made every man in the room stop moving. "Walk away." Rourke turned slowly. "What did you say?" "I said walk away." Arthur still hadn't moved, still stood there trembling, looking broken and harmless. But his voice... There was something in his voice that didn't match the man they saw. Something old and cold and absolutely certain. "You got to be the dumbest cripple I ever met," Danny Creek said. "You think you're going to stop us? You can't even hold a cup without spilling it." "Walk away," Arthur repeated. "Take your men. Leave this town. Don't come back." Rourke laughed, a genuine sound of amusement. "Or what, old man? You going to bore us to death? Shake on us till we leave?" "Or I'll kill every one of you," Arthur said simply. "Starting with the boy on your left and ending with you. Won't take more than 8 seconds. Maybe less if you all bunch up like you're doing." The laughter died. For a moment, no one moved. The absurdity of it, this broken old man threatening 7 armed killers, was so complete that it created its own kind of silence, the kind that comes before something breaks. Then Danny Creek reached for his gun. He was fast. Eleanor saw that much. His hand moved in a blur, fingers closing on the grip, starting the draw that he'd practiced 10,000 times until it was smoother than thought. He never cleared leather. Arthur moved, not fast the way Danny was fast, not with youth or strength or desperation. He moved like water finding cracks, like gravity pulling toward earth. Inevitable. Precise. Perfect. The 2 revolvers appeared in his hands. Eleanor didn't see him draw, just saw them there suddenly. Extensions of arms that had stopped trembling the moment violence became necessary. His body shifted, weight redistributing, spine straightening with a fluidity that erased decades in a heartbeat. And he was still, perfectly, absolutely still. Both guns leveled, one at Danny's chest, one at Rourke's head. The tremor was gone. The bent spine was gone. The frail old man was gone. In his place stood something else, something that had been there all along, buried beneath performance and patience and the desperate hope that it would never be needed again. "Sweet Jesus," someone whispered. Danny stood frozen, hand still on his gun, eyes wide with the sudden understanding that he'd made a terrible mistake. The other men had scattered, hands halfway to their weapons, bodies locked in the moment between action and terror. Rourke didn't move. His eyes had narrowed, and Eleanor saw recognition dawning there. Not of Arthur's face, but of something deeper. The way he stood, the way he held the guns. The absolute confidence of a man who'd done this so many times that death had become a language he spoke fluently. "I know you," Rourke said slowly. "No, you don't," Arthur replied. His voice was still quiet, but the gentleness was gone. What remained was flat and cold as winter stone. "But you know what I am. You've heard stories. Every man who's lived by the gun has heard them. And right now you're trying to decide if I'm real or just some broken old fool playing pretend." "Stories," Rourke said carefully. "What stories?" The ones they tell about men who killed for pay, who rode through towns like ash through wind and left bodies behind like breadcrumbs. Arthur's guns didn't waver, not even slightly. Stories about a man who could empty a room before anyone knew the fight had started, who never missed, who never hesitated, who earned a name that made hard men check their shadows. One of Rourke's men, the scarred one, made a sound like a wounded animal. "Gravehand," he whispered. "Christ almighty, it's Gravehand Hale." The name hit the room like a thunderclap. Eleanor had heard it. Everyone who'd spent time in the territories had heard it. Gravehand Hale, a frontier enforcer who'd vanished 15 years ago, either dead or retired, no one knew which. A man who'd killed more than 30 men in gunfights and never been wounded. A man whose hands were so steady, so sure, that people said he could thread a needle while standing on a galloping horse. A man who didn't exist anymore. Except he did. He was standing right in front of them. "That was a different life," Arthur said quietly. "A different man. I buried him a long time ago, along with the things he did. I came here to die quiet, work honest, maybe earn forgiveness from a god I stopped believing in around my 20th kill." "But," Rourke said, his voice had changed. The confidence was gone, replaced by the careful tone of a man negotiating with a loaded gun. "But then you killed James," Arthur finished. "Good man, honest man. Reminded me why I stopped, why I tried to become something better." His eyes, cold, empty, ancient, fixed on Rourke. "And when you walked through that door tonight planning to do worse to his widow, you made a choice. You chose this. You chose me. We can walk away," Rourke said quickly. "Right now, no trouble. You'll never see us again." "You're lying," Arthur said. "You'll leave tonight and come back tomorrow with 20 men. You'll burn this place and everyone in it, because that's what men like you do. You don't learn. You don't change. You just get meaner." "So what, you're going to kill us all?" Danny's voice cracked. 7 against 1? 8 seconds, Arthur reminded him. "I told you already, and I don't miss." For a long moment, no one breathed. Then Rourke moved. Not for his gun, he was smarter than that. He moved sideways, fast, using his men as cover while his hand dropped to his holster. Arthur fired. The sound was catastrophic in the enclosed space. Eleanor's ears rang, but through the noise she saw Rourke stumble, saw his hat fly off his head, saw the neat hole punch through the crown exactly 1 inch above where his skull had been. A warning shot. "Next one's lower," Arthur said calmly. The barrel of his right-hand gun tracked Rourke like he was tied to it with string. "And I don't miss." Rourke had gone white. His hand was still on his gun, but his fingers were frozen. 1 inch. The difference between alive and dead, measured in the width of a thought. "Anyone else?" Arthur's gaze swept the room. 7 armed men, and none of them moved. None of them breathed. They'd all seen it now. The impossible speed, the perfect aim, the utter absence of fear or doubt. They'd seen their own death standing in front of them wearing the face of an old man they'd dismissed as harmless. And they broke. It started with the scarred man. He took a step back, hands rising slowly. "I ain't dying for this," he said. "Caleb, you want that saloon so bad you take it yourself." "Stand your ground," Rourke snarled, but his voice shook. "Fuck your ground." Another man backed toward the door. "That's Gravehand Hale. You know what they say about him? They say he killed Big Dutch McCrae and 4 of his brothers in a hotel room in Abilene. 4 men dead before the first body hit the floor. They say—" "I don't care what they say," Rourke snapped, but he was backing up too. "He's old. He's alone. There's 7 of us." 6, the scarred man corrected, already at the door. "I'm out." He left. Just turned and walked out into the night. The others followed like dominoes. One by one they remembered they had somewhere else to be, something else to do, anything that didn't involve standing in a room with a man who'd sent 37 souls to whatever waited on the other side. Soon it was just Rourke and Danny Creek. "Your choice," Arthur said softly, "but make it quick. My patience ain't what it used to be." Danny broke first. He practically ran for the door, not even looking back. Rourke stood alone. His face was a mask of rage and humiliation and fear he couldn't quite hide. "This isn't over," he said. "Yes, it is," Arthur replied. "You're going to leave Red Hollow tonight. You're going to take your business elsewhere. and you're never coming back. Because if I see you again, if I even hear you're within 100 miles of this town, I won't give warnings. I won't give chances. I'll just put you down like the rabid dog you are. You think you scare me? I know I do. Arthur finally lowered his guns, just slightly, just enough. Fear's the only smart thing you've felt all night. Now get out of my sight before I change my mind about letting you leave vertical. Rourke stared at him for 5 long seconds. Then he turned and walked out, back straight, trying to salvage some scrap of dignity from the wreckage. The door closed behind him. Silence rushed in like floodwater. Arthur stood alone in the center of the room, guns hanging at his sides, breathing hard. As Eleanor watched, the tremor crept back into his hands. Slowly at first, then faster. The guns shook. His shoulders hunched. The weight of 70-plus years settled over him again like a shroud. He set the revolvers on the table with exaggerated care, sat down heavily, buried his face in his hands. "Arthur?" Eleanor's voice came out as barely a whisper. "I'm sorry," he said without looking up. "I'm sorry you had to see me like that. I tried so hard to bury him. I really did." Eleanor came out from behind the bar. Her legs felt like water, but she made them work. She crossed to Arthur's table, pulled out a chair, sat down across from him. "Who were you?" she asked. "Really?" "Someone who killed for money." Arthur's hands were still covering his face. "Someone who got good at it, too good, started taking pride in it, in being the best, in being feared. And then one day I looked in a mirror and didn't recognize what looked back. So you stopped. So I ran." He lowered his hands. His eyes were red. "Came out here to die quiet. Found work where no one asked questions. Learned to pretend the shakes were real, that I was just some broken old fool who couldn't hurt anyone. And for 15 years, that's what I was. What I tried to be." Eleanor reached across the table, took his trembling hands in hers. "You saved my life tonight. I did what I swore I'd never do again." His voice broke. "Used those guns. Became that man. All that work, all that trying to be better. And it took one night to throw it all away." "No," Eleanor said firmly. "You didn't become him. You used him. There's a difference. The man who walked into town 15 years ago would have killed them all. Would have enjoyed it. Would have slept fine after. But you?" She squeezed his hands. "You gave them a chance. You let them walk away. You chose mercy when you could have chosen murder. That's not throwing away 15 years of trying. That's proof it worked." Arthur looked at her. Really looked, like he was searching for a lie and desperately hoping not to find one. "I'm still a killer," he whispered. "No," Eleanor said. "You're a man who knows how to kill. That's not the same thing. And tonight, you used that knowledge to protect instead of destroy. James would have..." Her voice caught. "He would have been proud. I know I am." They sat like that for a long time, hands clasped across a table scarred by years of glasses and cards and ordinary human living. Outside, the sound of horses faded into the distance, carrying Caleb Rourke and his fear toward whatever future waited for men who built empires on other people's pain. "They'll come back," Arthur said eventually. "Maybe not Rourke, but someone like him, someone who hears the story and wants to prove they're faster, tougher, better. They always do. Then we'll deal with it," Eleanor said. "Together, as partners. Not victim and protector, but equals." Arthur managed a ghost of a smile. Equal partners, one saloon owner and one washed-up killer pretending to be a ranch hand. That's quite a partnership. "Best I've ever had," Eleanor said, and meant it. The night refused to end. Eleanor sat at the table long after Arthur had wrapped his guns back in oilcloth and tucked them away in the corner, long after her hands had stopped shaking enough to pour them both whiskey from the bottle she kept for emergencies. This qualified. The amber liquid burned going down, but it was a clean burn, honest, nothing like the sick heat that had filled her stomach when Rourke walked through that door. "You should sleep," Arthur said. He'd slumped back into himself, spine curved, hands trembling around his glass. The transformation back to frailty had been almost as unsettling as watching him shed it, like seeing someone put on a costume of their own decay. "So should you." "I don't sleep much anymore." He took a small sip, grimaced. "Haven't for years. Every time I close my eyes, I see faces. Men I killed, women I failed to save, kids who watched their fathers die because I was faster on the draw. He set the glass down carefully. Insomnia's better than those dreams. Eleanor wanted to say something comforting, something that would ease the weight she saw pressing down on him. But empty words felt worse than silence, so she just refilled his glass and let the quiet settle between them like dust. Outside, Red Hollow had gone dark. No lights in windows, no voices carrying through the summer air. The whole town was holding its breath, waiting to see if the storm had passed or if it was just gathering strength for a second blow. "They know," Arthur said after a while. "By morning, everyone will know what happened here tonight. Martha Gibbs saw Rourke's men ride in. She'll have told half the town by now, and the other half will hear it by breakfast. The story will spread like fire." "What story?" Eleanor asked. "That Gravehand Hale came back from the dead to save a saloon? That Gravehand Hale never died, that he's been here all along, sweeping floors and pretending to be harmless." Arthur's expression was bleak. "People don't forget names like that. Don't forgive them either. I'll be a curiosity now, or a threat. Either way, I won't be invisible anymore." "Is that what you wanted? To be invisible?" "It's what I needed." He stared into his whiskey like it held answers. "Anonymity's the only real penance. Can't atone for your sins if everyone keeps reminding you of them, treating you like you're still that person. I needed to be nobody so I could figure out how to be somebody worth a damn." Eleanor understood that. She'd spent 6 months trying to be just Eleanor, not James Voss's widow, not the woman whose husband died in the street. But grief had a way of making you visible, whether you wanted it or not, painting you in colors everyone could see. "Maybe being visible isn't the worst thing," she said. "Maybe it's just different." "Different how?" "Different like people knowing you're capable of protecting them. Different like Rourke spreading word that Red Hollow's not an easy target anymore." She met his eyes. "Different like having a reason to stay instead of just a place to hide." Arthur was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood, joints creaking in protest, and walked to the window. The street outside was empty, but Eleanor could tell he wasn't really looking at it. He was looking through it, into some distance only he could see. "I had a wife once," he said softly, "before I became what I became. Her name was Catherine. She had red hair and a laugh that could make you forget winter was coming. We had a little place outside Dodge City, nothing fancy, but it was ours. I worked odd jobs, saved money, planned to buy more land, build something that would last." Eleanor waited. She sensed this was a story Arthur didn't tell often, maybe had never told at all. Then a man named Pike Garrity rode through looking for his brother, who I'd gotten into a fight with over cards 6 months prior. Wasn't even a serious fight, split lip, black eye, nothing that didn't heal. But Pike, he took it personal. Came to our place while I was in town. Catherine was alone. Arthur's hands gripped the window frame. The wood creaked under the pressure. I found her when I got back. Pike had already ridden on, didn't even stay to watch what he'd done. Just left her there like she was nothing, like her whole life added up to less than his wounded pride. His voice had gone flat, empty of everything except the weight of old rage. I buried her behind the house under the cottonwood she loved. Then I dug up my father's old revolvers and rode after Pike Garrity. Did you find him? 3 days later in a whorehouse in Abilene. He was drunk, bragging about what he'd done, laughing. Arthur turned to face her. His eyes were terrible. I didn't give him a chance, didn't challenge him fair, just walked up and put 6 rounds in his chest before he could finish his whiskey. The law called it murder, but I called it justice, and I was the one holding the guns. Eleanor felt her throat tighten. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. I made my choices. Killed Pike, then killed the lawman who tried to arrest me. After that, it got easier. Every man I killed deserved it a little less, until I was just shooting anyone who paid well enough or stood in my way. Took me 12 years to realize I'd become exactly what I hated. Became Pike Garrity with a faster draw and a better excuse." He walked back to the table, but didn't sit. Just stood there, looking older than time. "Catherine would have been ashamed of what I turned into. That's what finally stopped me. Not conscience, not fear, just the thought that somewhere, if there's anything after this, she was watching. And she was disappointed. So I stopped. Buried the guns, buried the name, came here to do penance the only way I knew how. By being useless. By being less." You're not less, Var, Eleanor said firmly. You're just quiet. There's a difference. Is there? Arthur smiled sadly. Tonight I proved I'm still what I was, still capable of the same violence. The only thing that's changed is I'm slower to reach for it. But it's there, Eleanor. It's always there. And now everyone knows. Before Eleanor could respond, the sound of boots on the boardwalk made them both freeze. Multiple sets moving fast. Arthur's hand went to the corner where his guns lay wrapped and waiting, but Eleanor held up a hand. Wait, she said. Listen. The footsteps stopped at the door. Someone knocked. 3 quick raps, then 2 slow. A pattern Eleanor recognized. It's Thomas Bridger, she said, relaxing slightly. He's harmless. No one's harmless, Arthur muttered, but he stayed where he was. Eleanor opened the door. Thomas stood there looking like he'd run the whole way from his farm 2 miles out. He was 40-something, built like a scarecrow, with a face that had spent too many years squinting into the sun. Behind him stood 5 other men, farmers, ranch hands, the kind of folks who kept Red Hollow alive even when the town itself seemed determined to die. Mrs. Voss, Thomas said, breathing hard. Is it true, what Martha's saying about the gunfight? Eleanor glanced at Arthur, who'd retreated deeper into the shadows. He shook his head once, a tiny gesture that said, keep me out of this. There was trouble, Eleanor said carefully. Caleb Rourke and his men came by, made threats, but they left. No one was hurt. Martha said the old man, Arthur, she said he... Thomas stopped, searching for words. She said he stood up to them, 7 armed men, and he faced them down. The other men muttered among themselves. Eleanor caught fragments. Impossible, just an old man. Must have been something else. Arthur helped, Eleanor said. That's all that matters. Helped how? This from Jacob Morse, who ran the general store Rourke hadn't managed to steal yet. No offense, Mrs. Voss, but we've all seen Arthur. Man can barely lift a sack of flour without needing to sit down. How's he supposed to run off 7 killers? Maybe you don't know him as well as you think, Eleanor said quietly. That created a different kind of silence. The men exchanged glances, uncertainty replacing skepticism. Thomas stepped closer, lowering his voice. There's talk, ma'am, about who Arthur really is. About a name from years back. People are saying... He swallowed. They're saying Gravehand Hale's been living in Red Hollow all this time, that you've been harboring him. I haven't been harboring anyone, Eleanor said, feeling anger flare hot in her chest. Arthur's been working here for 3 years. He's never caused trouble, never hurt anyone. Whatever he was before he came here, he's paid his dues. He's earned the right to be left alone. We're not trying to cause trouble, Thomas said quickly. It's just, if it's true, if he really is who they say, then maybe things can change. Maybe we don't have to keep letting men like Rourke run roughshod over us. Maybe we can fight back. Arthur stepped out of the shadows then, and the men collectively took a step back. Even knowing he was there, even seeing how old and bent he was, there was something in the way he moved now that made them nervous, like watching a wolf pretend to be a dog. You could see the pretense, but you couldn't forget what was underneath. You want to fight back, Arthur said. It wasn't a question. Thomas found his courage. We're tired of being afraid. Tired of watching our neighbors get run off their land, watching good people pack up and leave because the law won't protect them, and they can't protect themselves. If there's a chance, if you're really him, really Gravehand Hale, then maybe you could teach us. Help us organize. Show us how to... No. The word hit like a hammer. Thomas flinched. I'm not a teacher, Arthur said. I'm not a leader. And I sure as hell ain't a savior. What I am is a man who's killed more people than most of you have ever met, and who spent the last 15 years trying to figure out how to live with that. You want my advice? Pack up, leave. Find somewhere safer and start over. Fighting men like Rourke only works if you're willing to become like them. And trust me, that's a trade that costs more than you can afford. We can't just leave, Jacob protested. This is our home, our land, our... Your grave, Arthur interrupted. If you stay and fight without knowing what you're doing, Rourke's got money, men, and nothing resembling a conscience. You've got pitchforks and good intentions. That's not a fight. That's a massacre waiting for a date on the calendar. Then teach us, Thomas said desperately. Make it a fair fight. You said yourself you used to... I used to kill people for money, Arthur snapped. That's not a skill set you want to learn. That's a disease you catch and never shake. Every man I taught how to shoot, how to fight, how to kill, they all ended up dead or worse. And the worst part is what you become when you realize killing's easier than living. When you start seeing every problem as something a bullet can solve. I won't do that to you. I won't be responsible for turning decent men into what I was. The men stood there, deflated. Eleanor saw the hope draining out of them like water from a cracked barrel, leaving only the same resignation that had been eating Red Hollow alive for months. So we just give up, Jacob said bitterly. That's your advice. Run or surrender. That's my advice, Arthur confirmed, because I've seen what happens when farmers try to play gunfighter. It ends with widows and orphans and men who died brave but still just as dead. You want to protect your families? Get them somewhere safe. Swallow your pride, abandon your land, and live to see your kids grow up. Pride's not worth a damn when you're bleeding out in the dirt. And what about you? Thomas asked. You staying, or are you running too? Arthur was quiet for a long moment. I'm staying, but that's different. How? Because I'm already dead inside. I'm just waiting for the outside to catch up. You still have something to lose. That's the difference between us. The men filed out slowly, shoulders slumped, defeated before they'd even tried to fight. Thomas was the last to leave. He paused at the door, looked back at Arthur. My grandfather fought at Antietam, he said quietly. Came home missing half his leg and most of his hearing. Know what he told me before he died? He said the worst thing about war wasn't the fighting. It was watching good men do nothing because they were too scared to do something. He said cowardice kills more people than bullets, just slower and quieter. Your grandfather was a soldier, Arthur replied. Soldiers fight because they're ordered to, because their brothers are fighting, because surrender means worse than death. You're not soldiers. You're fathers and farmers and shopkeepers. There's no shame in choosing life over land. Thomas nodded slowly. Maybe not, but there's no pride in it either. He left. The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded final. Eleanor turned to Arthur. You really believe that? That they should just leave? I believe that fighting Rourke will get them killed, Arthur said. And I believe I'm not capable of teaching anyone how to fight without teaching them how to enjoy it, how to need it, how to become it. He slumped back into his chair. So yeah, running's the smart choice. But you're not running. I told you, I'm different. Because you're already dead inside, Eleanor repeated his words back to him, and they sounded even worse the second time. That's nonsense, Arthur. You're not dead. You're just scared. His head snapped up. Scared of what? Of being needed. Of mattering again. Of having a reason to live instead of just a place to die. Eleanor sat across from him, leaned forward. Those men came here hoping you'd give them permission to fight back. But you're not scared they'll fail. You're scared they'll succeed. Because if they succeed without becoming monsters, it means you could have too. It means all those years of killing weren't inevitable. They were choices. Arthur's jaw worked. For a moment, Eleanor thought he might actually hit her, or storm out, or do something to prove she was wrong. Instead, he just sat there, looking like she'd shot him somewhere that wouldn't show. You don't know what you're talking about, he said finally. Don't I? You said you became what you hated, but what if you didn't have to? What if you could have stopped after Pike Garrity, could have put the guns away and walked away clean? Would that make it better or worse? Worse, Arthur whispered, because it would mean I chose it, all of it. Every body, every widow, every kid who grew up without a father because I was good at killing and liked being good at something. Exactly. And if you help those men, if you show them how to protect themselves without losing themselves, you prove that violence isn't a disease. It's a tool. And tools don't corrupt people. People corrupt tools. Eleanor reached across the table, took his trembling hands in hers. You're not what you did, Arthur. You're what you do next. He pulled away, stood up, walked to the window again, and stared out at the empty street. You're asking me to be something I'm not. I'm asking you to be what you've been pretending to be for 15 years. A good man. The only difference is now you might actually believe it. Before Arthur could respond, the sound of a single horse approaching fast made them both tense. Eleanor moved to the door, peered out through the crack. A rider came thundering down the main street, horse lathered and blowing hard. He pulled up in front of the saloon, nearly fell out of the saddle in his haste to dismount. Eleanor recognized him, Billy Chen, one of the hands from the Circle T ranch 10 miles out. She opened the door. "Billy, what's wrong?" "Rourke," Billy gasped. He was Chinese, maybe 25, with fear bright in his dark eyes. "He rode through Circle T an hour ago. Burned the bunkhouse. Killed 2 men who tried to stop him. Mr. Thornton's hurt bad. They're saying Rourke's going ranch to ranch, burning out anyone who might stand against him. Says if Red Hollow wants to harbor Gravehand Hale, then Red Hollow can burn too." Eleanor's blood turned to ice. "How many men does he have?" "Started with 6. Picked up more in Wilson Creek, hired guns, drifters, anyone willing to kill for pay. Last count was 15, maybe 20. They're coming this way, Mrs. Voss. Should be here by dawn." Arthur appeared behind Eleanor. "Thornton's men. How many can fight?" Billy shook his head. "Most scattered when the shooting started. Only a handful stayed. They're fortified up in the main house, but they won't last long. Rourke's got them surrounded." "And you rode here instead of helping them," Arthur said. No judgment in his voice, just observation. "Mr. Thornton sent me. Said to warn the town. Said people need to evacuate before Rourke gets here." Billy's hands were shaking. "Said to tell Eleanor Voss she was right to stand up to him, but now she needs to run. There's no winning this. Not anymore." Eleanor felt the weight of it settling over her like a burial shroud. Rourke wasn't just coming back, he was coming back with an army. And it was her fault. Her refusal to sell, Arthur's defense of her, had turned this from a land grab into something personal, something that would end in blood and ash. "Go house to house," she told Billy. "Wake everyone. Tell them to take what they can carry and head east. There's a canyon 5 miles out with caves. They can hide there until this is over." "What about you?" "I'll be along." A lie, but a necessary one. Billy needed to focus on saving others, not arguing with her. He nodded, climbed back on his exhausted horse, and rode off toward the residential part of town. Eleanor closed the door, turned to Arthur. 20 men, she said. Maybe more by the time they get here. And they're not just coming to take the saloon anymore. They're coming to make an example. I know. So what do we do? Arthur walked to the corner where his guns lay wrapped in oilcloth. He stared at them for a long moment, hands flexing at his sides. "We do what we should have done 15 years ago," he said quietly. "We make a stand. Not because we'll win, not because it's smart, but because some things are worth dying for. And if we're going to die anyway, might as well die making sure Rourke remembers why he should have stayed afraid." Eleanor felt something shift in her chest, fear and pride and a terrible kind of relief all tangled together. "You'll fight?" "I'll fight." He picked up the guns, unwrapped them slowly. In the lamplight they gleamed like promises, or threats. "But I'm going to need help, real help, not farmers with pitchforks, but people who know what they're getting into. People who understand that this might be the last thing they ever do. I'll fight with you." "You don't know how." "Then teach me." Eleanor straightened her spine, met his eyes. "You said you won't teach people to become killers. Fine. Teach me to survive. Teach me to protect what's mine. That's not the same thing, is it?" Arthur studied her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. "No," he said. "It's not the same thing. But it's close enough to scare me." He handed her one of his revolvers. It was heavier than she expected, cold and purposeful in her grip. "First lesson," Arthur said. "That gun's not a magic wand. It won't make you brave, won't make you strong, won't make you right. All it does is make you capable. How you use that capability is what determines whether you're a protector or a killer. You understand?" "I understand." Second lesson. He positioned her hands on the grip, adjusting her fingers. "You aim for center mass. Not the head, not the legs. Center mass. Biggest target, most stopping power. You shoot until the threat stops being a threat. One shot might not be enough. 2 might not be enough. You keep shooting until you're safe." Eleanor swallowed hard. "And if I miss, then you die. Or I die. Or we both die. But at least we die trying to protect something that matters, instead of running from something we're too scared to face." He stepped back. Third lesson, and this is the most important one. You don't draw that gun unless you're willing to use it. Because the moment it comes out of the holster, someone's getting hurt. Might be them. Might be you. But someone's bleeding before it goes back. You accept that? Eleanor looked down at the revolver in her hands. It was just metal and wood. no different from a hammer or a saw, another tool for building or destroying, depending on the hands that held it. I accept it, she said. Arthur smiled then, a real smile, sad and proud and terrible all at once. Then let's get to work. We've got maybe 6 hours before dawn before Rourke and his men come through here looking for blood. That's not enough time to make you a gunfighter, but it might be enough to keep you alive. He moved to the door, locked it, pulled the curtains. And Eleanor, when this is over, when the smoke clears and the body's cool, I want you to remember something. What? That I tried to talk you out of this. That I gave you every chance to run. Because when you're standing over dead men you killed, when you're washing their blood off your hands and wondering if you're still the person you were yesterday, you're going to need to remember that you chose this. Not me. You. Eleanor met his gaze and didn't flinch. I'll remember, she said. Now, teach me how to shoot. The back room of the brass bell had never been used for target practice before. Arthur cleared out the storage shelves, stacking crates of empty bottles against the far wall. He chalked crude circles on the wood at chest height, 3 of them, each about the size of a dinner plate. Then he walked Eleanor through the mechanics of killing with the same patient tone most men used to teach their daughters how to sew. Feet shoulder-width apart, he said, positioning himself beside her. Weight forward, knees bent. You're not a statue, you're a spring. Ready to move, ready to absorb the recoil. Eleanor adjusted her stance. The gun felt wrong in her hands, too heavy and too light at the same time, like holding something that wasn't meant to be held. Now the grip. Dominant hand high on the back strap, support hand wrapped around it. Firm, but not strangling. Think of it like holding a bird. Tight enough it can't escape, loose enough you don't crush it. She tried. Her hands felt clumsy, unsure. The revolver wobbled. Again, Arthur said. No impatience in his voice, just steady instruction. You've got to trust your hands. They know what to do. Your brain's the part that gets confused. My hands are shaking. Everyone's hands shake the first time. Hell, mine still do, and I've been doing this since before you were born. The trick isn't stopping the shake, it's shooting between the tremors. He demonstrated, raising his own revolver. His hands trembled like leaves in wind, but when he squeezed the trigger, the barrel was perfectly still for that split second that mattered. The hammer clicked on an empty chamber. You shoot between heartbeats, he explained. Between breaths, between the moments of fear. Find the stillness inside the chaos and pull the trigger there. Everything else is just noise. Eleanor raised the gun, sighted down the barrel at the leftmost circle. Her heart was hammering so hard she could feel it in her teeth. She tried to find the stillness Arthur talked about, but all she found was more fear. She squeezed the trigger. The hammer fell on an empty chamber with a dry click that sounded impossibly loud in the enclosed space. Too slow, Arthur said. You're thinking about it. Thinking kills. You see the threat, you aim, you shoot. One motion, like swinging a hammer or chopping wood. You don't think about each individual muscle. You just do it. I've never killed anyone before, Eleanor said. Her voice came out smaller than she wanted. I know. That's what makes this hard. You're fighting every instinct that says taking a life is wrong. And those instincts are right, mostly. But tonight, they'll get you killed. He moved behind her, adjusted her elbows. So you've got to make a choice right now before the shooting starts. You've got to decide if you're willing to become someone who's killed. Because once you pull that trigger for real, once you watch a man drop because of something you did, you can't unkill him, can't take it back. Can't pretend it didn't happen. Eleanor lowered the gun, turned to face him. Did it change you? The first time? Arthur was quiet for a moment. Pike Garrity wasn't my first. My first was a drunk who tried to rob me outside Wichita when I was 19. Pulled a knife, demanded my money. I shot him 3 times before I even realized I'd drawn my gun. He died in the street while I stood there watching, waiting to feel something. Guilt, maybe. Remorse. Horror. He shook his head. But all I felt was relief. Relief that it was him and not me. That I was faster. That I'd lived. And later came the guilt. Took about 3 days. I was eating breakfast in a diner and I suddenly couldn't swallow because all I could taste was copper. All I could see was his face when he realized he was dying. Took me a week before I could keep food down. Took me a month before I stopped seeing him in my sleep. Arthur met her eyes. But you know what the worst part was? The part that really broke something inside me? Eleanor shook her head. 6 months later, I killed a man in Dodge City over a card game, and it was easier. Didn't feel anything until 2 days later instead of 3. Didn't lose as much sleep. And I realized that every time I pulled the trigger, it would get a little easier, a little less human, until one day I'd be killing people and feeling nothing at all. Is that what happened to you? No. I stopped at 17. 17 men, and I could still name every one of them, tell you what they looked like when they fell. If I'd made it to 20, 30, 50, I would have forgotten their faces, would have stopped counting, would have become something that used to be human. He took the gun from her hands, checked the cylinder even though he knew it was empty. That's what I'm trying to save you from, Eleanor. Not dying. Dying's easy. I'm trying to save you from living with what you'll have to do to survive. Then why teach me at all? Because you asked. Because you deserve the choice, and because... He paused, searching for words. Because maybe if you can learn to kill without losing yourself, it means there was hope for me too. Means I didn't have to become what I became. Means it was all just choices, and I chose wrong. Eleanor took the gun back. The weight of it felt different now, not heavier, but more real, like it had stopped being a thing and started being a responsibility. Teach me, she said. I'll deal with the guilt later. Right now I just need to know how to survive. They practiced for 2 hours. Arthur loaded a single round into each cylinder, made her dry fire 50 times for every live shot. When she finally pulled the trigger on a loaded chamber, the recoil shocked her. Not the physical kick, which Arthur's positioning had prepared her for, but the violence of it, the noise, the way the gun wanted to jump out of her hands like something alive. Her shot went wide, punching a hole in the wall 3 feet from the target. Again, Arthur said. She shot again, closer this time, but still wide. Again. By the 10th shot, her hands had stopped shaking. By the 20th, she'd hit the outer edge of one of the circles. By the 30th, she could put a round within 6 inches of where she was aiming more often than not. It wasn't good. Arthur made that clear. But it was better than nothing, which was all she'd had an hour ago. You're not a gunfighter, he told her as she reloaded with clumsy fingers. Won't ever be. But you can point and shoot, and sometimes that's enough. Key is knowing when to shoot and when to run. Pride kills more people than bullets. I'm not running anymore, Eleanor said. I know, that's what scares me. Outside, the sound of wagons moving through town, families evacuating, taking Arthur's advice even if the men had rejected it. Smart ones, Eleanor thought. The ones who chose life over land. She wondered if that made her stupid or brave. Probably stupid. Brave people didn't have to work this hard to stop their hands from shaking. A knock at the front door made them both freeze. Arthur moved to the window, peered out through a gap in the curtains. His shoulders relaxed slightly. Thomas Bridger, he said, and he brought friends. Eleanor went to the door, opened it. Thomas stood there with 6 other men, all of them armed with hunting rifles and old revolvers that looked like they'd been pulled out of closets and trunks. None of them looked ready for war. They looked like exactly what they were. Farmers and shopkeepers playing at being soldiers. Thought you were leaving, Eleanor said. Tried to, Thomas admitted. Got my family to the wagons, told them to head for the caves. But I couldn't go with them. Couldn't just run while you and Arthur stayed behind to face what's coming. You'll die, Arthur said from behind Eleanor. He'd appeared like a ghost, guns holstered at his sides now, looking every inch the man he'd claimed not to be. Rourke's bringing 20 men, maybe more. Professionals, killers. You're bringing 6 farmers with guns they barely know how to shoot. 7, Jacob Morse corrected. And we might not be professionals, but we know how to kill. Hunt deer, put down sick cattle, shoot coyotes threatening the flock. A man's a man, same as any animal. Point and pull. How hard can it be? Arthur laughed, a bitter sound with no humor in it. That's exactly the kind of thinking that gets you killed in the first 30 seconds. Animals don't shoot back. Men do. And when someone's shooting at you, when bullets are punching holes in the air 6 inches from your head, your body stops working right. Your hands shake. Your aim goes wild. You forget everything you thought you knew and just react on instinct. So teach us, Thomas said. We've got till dawn. That's what, 4 hours? 5? Show us how to not die in the first 30 seconds. After that, we'll figure the rest out as we go. Arthur stared at them for a long moment. Eleanor could see the war happening behind his eyes, the part of him that wanted to save them fighting against the part that knew he couldn't, not really. That no amount of teaching would turn farmers into fighters, and trying would just give them enough confidence to get killed with false hope instead of realistic fear. But then something shifted in his expression. Some calculation Eleanor couldn't follow, some decision made. "All right," Arthur said quietly, "but we're not doing this the way you think. I'm not teaching you to be gunfighters. I'm teaching you to be survivors. There's a difference. You understand?" The men nodded, eager as students on the first day of school. None of them understood what they were agreeing to. None of them realized that the lesson Arthur was about to teach would cost them pieces of themselves they'd never get back. Arthur had them clear the saloon floor, pushing tables and chairs against the walls. He stood in the center of the open space, hands at his sides, looking at each man in turn. "First lesson," he said, "you're all going to die." The statement hung in the air like gun smoke. Thomas shifted uncomfortably. "What's that supposed to mean?" Jacob asked. "It means you accept it right now. Accept that when Rourke comes, there's a good chance you're not walking away. You might catch a bullet in the chest, might bleed out slow in the street while your friends watch, might die screaming, might die quiet, but either way you're probably dying. You accept that?" None of them answered. Arthur nodded like that was answer enough. "Good. Because once you accept you're dead, you stop being scared, stop hesitating, stop thinking about tomorrow because you probably don't have one. And that's when you become dangerous. Not because you're skilled, you're not, but because you've got nothing left to lose, and men with nothing to lose are the hardest ones to kill." He drew one of his revolvers, in a motion too fast to follow, pointed it at Thomas's chest. "Bang," Arthur said. "You're dead. Died trying to draw your rifle. What did you do wrong?" Thomas looked down at the hunting rifle in his hands, still pointing at the floor. I wasn't ready?" "No. You were ready. You knew I was going to draw. You were expecting it, but you still died because your weapon's wrong for this fight." Arthur holstered his gun. "Rifles are for distance, for shooting things that can't shoot back, or shooting men who don't know you're there. But in close quarters, against multiple targets, a rifle's just expensive firewood. Too slow to aim, too slow to swing between targets. Time you get one man, 3 others have filled you with holes. So what do we use?" Jacob asked. "Rifles," Arthur said, and smiled at their confusion. "Because they're what you've got, and there's no time to get you anything better. But you use them smart. You pick your positions, set up crossfire, make sure every man's got a clear field of fire and isn't going to shoot his friends by accident. You spread out, fortify, and turn this into a siege instead of a shootout." He moved to the bar, grabbed a piece of chalk, started sketching on the floorboards. "Red Hollow's got one main street. Everything else is side alleys and back lots. Rourke's going to come straight down the middle because he's arrogant and he wants everyone to see him coming, wants to prove he's not afraid. That's his weakness, ego, so we use it against him." Arthur drew X marks at various points along his chalk map. "Thomas, you're on the roof of the general store. High ground, clear sight lines down the street. You start shooting the moment they're in range. Don't aim for Rourke. He's mine. Aim for the men on the flanks, the ones who look nervous. They'll break first." "How do I know which ones are nervous?" Thomas asked. "They'll be the ones not laughing. The hired guns Rourke picked up in Wilson Creek. They're in it for money, not loyalty. Kill 1 or 2 and the rest will reconsider whether getting paid is worth getting dead." He pointed at 2 more X marks. "Jacob, you and Sam take the boarding house windows. 2nd floor, opposite sides of the street. You create crossfire. Anyone who makes it past Thomas has to run a gauntlet between your positions. Don't shoot at the same target. Pick different men. Force them to choose who to shoot back at." "What if they all shoot at me?" Sam Wheeler asked. He was young, maybe 20, with the kind of face that had never seen real violence. "Then you duck," Arthur said flatly, "and hope your cover holds. I can't promise you'll survive, Sam. Can't promise any of you will. Best I can do is give you better odds than charging straight at them in the street." He assigned the remaining men to positions, rooftops, windows, anywhere with cover and elevation. Then he walked them through scenarios. What to do if someone flanked their position. How to reload under fire. When to shoot and when to hold fire. When to run and when to stay. Eleanor watched him transform from reluctant teacher to tactical commander, watched decades of hard-won experience pour out in instructions delivered with absolute clarity. This was Arthur Hale at his core. Not the broken old man or the legendary gunfighter, but something in between. A soldier who'd learned violence and was trying to pass on the survival parts without the poison. "What about me?" Eleanor asked when he'd finished positioning everyone else. Arthur looked at her for a long moment. "You're staying here, in the saloon, behind the bar with a shotgun and those revolvers. You're the last line. If everyone else fails, if Rourke makes it this far, you kill him or die trying. That's your job. Guard the final position." "That's not fair," Eleanor protested. "I can fight too. You can barely hit a target from 10 feet, Arthur interrupted. "No shame in that. But putting you on a rooftop with a rifle you don't know how to use is suicide. Here, in close quarters, with weapons that don't require precision, you've got a chance. Better than the chance you'd have anywhere else." He was right. Eleanor hated it, but he was right. She wasn't a fighter, wasn't a soldier. She was a saloon owner who'd learned to shoot a revolver in the space of 2 hours. Expecting more than that was fantasy. "What about you?" she asked. "Where will you be?" Arthur smiled that sad smile again. "Same place I've always been when the shooting starts, right in the middle of it. Someone's got to draw their attention, keep them focused on the obvious threat while you all hit them from the sides." "That's suicide," Thomas said. "Probably," Arthur agreed. "But I'm an old man with a bad back and blood on my hands going back decades. I've been dead for 15 years, just too stubborn to lie down. You're young, you've got families, you've got futures. I don't. So if someone's got to be the target, might as well be someone who's already used up his second chances." The clock on the wall ticked toward 3 in the morning. Outside, Red Hollow had gone silent. All the families evacuated, all the lights extinguished. The town waited like a corpse for whoever would claim it come morning. Arthur sent the men to their positions with final instructions. They left quietly, grimly, men walking toward something they couldn't escape and weren't sure they'd survive. Eleanor watched them go and wondered how many would see the sunset tonight. When they were alone again, Arthur sat at the bar. Eleanor poured them both whiskey without being asked. They drank in silence, listening to the wind move through the empty street. "You think they'll hold?" Eleanor asked. "No," Arthur said honestly. "They'll break. Question is whether they break after they've done enough damage to matter or before, and whether Rourke cares enough to chase them when they run." "And us? You think we'll survive?" Arthur was quiet for a moment. Then he reached across the bar, took her hand in his trembling fingers. "I think that when the sun comes up, Red Hollow's going to learn what it really costs to stand against evil. And I think that cost's going to be higher than anyone wants to pay." He squeezed her hand. "But I also think that some things are worth the cost. Your husband understood that, died understanding it. Maybe that's what we're doing here, proving he was right. That standing matters, even when you can't win. That's bleak comfort. It's the only kind I've got left." Eleanor finished her whiskey, set the glass down. "Then I guess it'll have to be enough." They sat there as the night wore on, waiting for dawn and the violence it would bring. Arthur cleaned his guns for the 3rd time, checking mechanisms that didn't need checking. Eleanor practiced her draw, trying to shave fractions of seconds off movements that still felt awkward and wrong. Around 4:30, a sound drifted in from the east. Horses. Multiple riders, moving at a steady pace. No rush. Why would there be? They were bringing an army to face a ghost town defended by farmers and one old killer who should have died years ago. Arthur stood, checked his guns one final time, holstered them with the ease of a man putting on a familiar coat. "It's time," he said. Eleanor picked up the shotgun James had kept under the bar. It was heavy, brutal, designed for close-range stopping power. She'd never fired it, never had reason to. Tonight would change that. "Arthur," she said as he walked toward the door, "if we don't make it, if this is the end, I want you to know something." He paused, hand on the doorknob. "You're not what you were," Eleanor said. "You're not Gravehand Hale anymore. You're just Arthur, a man who tried to be better, who succeeded, mostly. And whatever happens today, that matters. That counts." Arthur's shoulders shifted. For a moment, Eleanor thought he might turn around, might say something in response. Instead, he just nodded once and stepped out into the pre-dawn darkness. Eleanor watched him walk to the center of the street and stop. Watched him stand there alone, a bent old man facing east toward the sound of approaching horses. The sky was starting to lighten. Not true dawn yet, but that gray period before it where the world exists in between darkness and light. She positioned herself behind the bar, shotgun in hand, revolvers within easy reach. Her heart was trying to hammer its way out of her chest, but her hands were steady. Strange, that. She'd expected more fear. Instead, she just felt tired. Tired and determined and ready for this to be over, one way or another. The sound of horses grew louder. Eleanor could make out individual hoofbeats now, could tell there were more than 20 riders. Closer to 30, maybe. Rourke hadn't come to negotiate. He'd come to destroy. The first riders appeared as silhouettes against the lightening sky. They spread out across the width of the street, a wall of men and horses and weapons. In the center rode Caleb Rourke, tall and confident and smiling, like this was the best morning he'd had in years. He pulled his horse to a stop 30 yards from where Arthur stood. The other riders fanned out behind him, forming a crescent of violence. "Well, well," Rourke called out. His voice carried clear in the pre-dawn quiet. "Gravehand Hale, standing in the street like he's got a death wish. I'd be touched by the gesture if I didn't know you were just too old and stupid to run." Arthur didn't respond. He just stood there, hands at his sides, waiting. "Last night you embarrassed me," Rourke continued. "Ran me out of that saloon in front of my men. Made me look weak." "You know what happens to men who make me look weak, Arthur?" Still no response. Arthur was a statue. "They die slow," Rourke said, "screaming. And then I burn everything they ever cared about and salt the earth so nothing grows again. That's what's going to happen to this town. That's what's going to happen to Eleanor Voss. And you're going to watch before I finally let you die." Arthur spoke then. His voice was quiet, but it carried. "You talk too much. Always have. All you men who need to prove how dangerous you are, you talk and talk because deep down you know the truth. Know that words are safer than action. Know that once the shooting starts, you might be the one who ends up dead." He finally moved, shifting his weight forward slightly. "So here's my counteroffer. You ride away right now. Take your hired guns and your wounded pride, and you leave Red Hollow behind. Do that, and you get to live. Stay, and you die in this street. Your choice." Rourke laughed. "You and what army, old man? I count 30 guns on my side. How many you got? You? Maybe a few farmers hiding in windows? That's not a fight. That's target practice." "Maybe," Arthur allowed. "But the first target's going to be you, Caleb. I can draw and put 6 rounds in your chest before your men even clear leather. I did it to better men than you when I was younger. You really want to bet your life that I can't do it now?" The smile slipped from Rourke's face. Eleanor saw fear flicker across it, just for a moment, but real. He was remembering last night, remembering how fast Arthur had moved, how absolutely certain death had felt in that saloon. "Kill him," Rourke said. 30 men reached for their guns. Arthur drew, and the war came to Red Hollow with the rising sun. The first shot came from Thomas Bridger's rifle. Eleanor heard it crack from the rooftop of the general store, saw one of Rourke's men jerk sideways in his saddle. Not a killing shot. Thomas's aim was rushed, panicked, but enough to shatter the moment of frozen tension and turn it into chaos. Then everyone was shooting. Arthur's revolvers appeared in his hands like magic, and even from inside the saloon, Eleanor could see the change in him. The tremor vanished. His spine straightened. Decades fell away, and what remained was the man he'd been before guilt and time had worn him down to something human. His first shot took Rourke's hat off for the second time in 2 days. The second punched through the shoulder of the man to Rourke's left, spinning him clean out of the saddle. Arthur was moving as he fired, not standing still like some fool in a dime novel, but flowing sideways, making himself a harder target, guns tracking different threats with each shot. But he was one man against 30, and math doesn't care about legends. Bullets chewed up the street around him. Wood splintered. Dust exploded in tiny geysers. A round caught Arthur's left arm and spun him halfway around. But he kept moving, kept shooting, burning through his 12 rounds like he had all the ammunition in the world. From the boarding house windows, Jacob and Sam opened fire. Their rifles boomed, heavy and slow compared to the sharp crack of pistols. One of Rourke's hired guns took a round through the chest and fell from his horse without making a sound. Another caught one in the leg and started screaming. The street turned into a storm of noise and smoke and confusion. Horses reared and bolted. Men scattered, looking for cover that didn't exist in the wide-open killing ground Arthur had deliberately chosen. Some of them fired back, wild shots that went high or wide. Others just ran, the hired guns realizing they weren't getting paid enough to die in some dusty nowhere town. Eleanor watched it all through the saloon window, hands tight on the shotgun, counting the seconds until Arthur went down. He had to go down. No one could stand in the middle of that hell and survive. It was impossible. But Arthur kept moving, kept shooting. When his revolvers clicked empty, he dove behind a water trough, reloading with hands that somehow still worked despite the blood running down his left arm. Splinters exploded from the trough's wooden sides as bullets hammered into it, but Arthur stayed low, stayed focused, clicking fresh rounds into cylinders with the mechanical precision of a man who'd done this 10,000 times. "Come on," Eleanor whispered. "Get up. Move." Arthur rolled out from behind the trough, came up shooting. His aim was still perfect, impossibly perfect. A man leaning out from behind a horse went down with a hole in his forehead. Another took a round through the throat and collapsed, clutching at the ruin of his neck. But there were too many. Even as Arthur cut them down, the rest were spreading out, finding cover, organizing. These weren't farmers or shopkeepers. Rourke had brought real killers, men who'd survived other gunfights and knew how to fight back. A bullet caught Arthur in the ribs. Eleanor saw him stagger, saw his face go white. He fired twice more, then went to one knee behind an overturned barrel. "No," Eleanor breathed. "Get up, please, get up." From the rooftop, Thomas kept shooting. His aim was getting better, Eleanor realized. Fear was burning away, leaving only the mechanical action of working the rifle's lever, finding a target, squeezing the trigger. He dropped another man, then another, but return fire was chewing up the storefront below him, and Eleanor could see him flinching with each impact, could see the moment approaching when he'd break and run. Rourke had dismounted, using his horse as a shield. He was shouting orders, directing his men to flank around, to get behind the positions Thomas and the others held. He'd figured out the ambush fast, faster than Arthur had probably hoped. Now it was just a matter of time before the farmers broke, and Rourke's men overwhelmed them through sheer numbers. Arthur was still down behind the barrel. He'd stopped shooting. Eleanor could see him moving, trying to reload, but his hands were shaking badly now. Blood soaked his shirt on the left side, dark and spreading. Too much blood. "Stay down," Eleanor whispered, even though he couldn't hear her. "Just stay down." But Arthur didn't stay down. He never stayed down. That was his problem. He didn't know how to quit even when quitting was the smart choice. He rose to his feet, swaying, revolvers hanging at his sides. Blood dripped from his fingertips. His face was gray with pain and blood loss, but his eyes were still cold, still focused. "Rourke!" he called out. His voice cracked halfway through the name, weak where it should have been strong. "You wanted me? Come get me. Stop hiding behind your horse like a coward." It was a taunt, a desperate play to draw attention back to himself, to give Thomas and the others a chance to do more damage while Rourke's men focused on the obvious threat. Eleanor saw the calculation in it, saw Arthur trading his life for seconds, maybe minutes, of distraction. Rourke saw it too. He smiled, then gestured to 3 of his men. They came at Arthur from different angles, spreading out to create crossfire. Professional work. Efficient. Arthur would be dead in seconds. Eleanor moved without thinking. She stepped out from behind the bar, through the saloon's front door, onto the boardwalk with the shotgun in her hands. The morning light hit her eyes, too bright, making her squint. The street was chaos, smoke and noise and the metallic smell of blood mixing with dust. One of the 3 men saw her, started to turn, bringing his pistol around. Eleanor pulled both triggers. The shotgun's recoil nearly knocked her down. The sound was catastrophic, louder than anything she'd ever heard. The man she'd aimed at, she didn't know his name, would never know it, caught the full spread at 15 feet and went down in pieces. Eleanor stood frozen, staring at what she'd done, at the red mist still hanging in the air where a man had been standing a second ago. Her stomach heaved. The shotgun fell from her numb fingers. "Eleanor!" Arthur's voice cut through her shock. "Get down!" She dropped, more from instinct than thought. A bullet cracked through the space where her head had been, punching through the saloon's wall behind her. Arthur was moving again, firing at the other 2 men who'd been advancing on him. One went down clutching his leg. The other dove for cover. The momentary advantage Eleanor had bought him was already gone, but it had been enough. He was still alive, still fighting. Eleanor scrambled back toward the saloon door on hands and knees, glass from the broken window cutting her palms. She made it inside, grabbed one of the revolvers Arthur had given her, tried to remember everything he'd taught her: grip, stance, breathe, shoot between heartbeats. But her heart was racing so fast there was no space between beats, just one long continuous thunder that shook her entire body. A man appeared in the doorway, young, maybe Danny Creek's age, with wild eyes and a pistol pointed at her chest. Eleanor raised her gun, pulled the trigger. The hammer fell on an empty chamber with a dry click. She'd forgotten to load it. The young man smiled, started to squeeze his own trigger. Glass shattered as Thomas's rifle shot came through the window, catching the young man in the side. He stumbled, turned toward the new threat, fired twice toward the rooftop. Eleanor could hear Thomas yelling, pain or fear, she couldn't tell which. While the young man was distracted, Eleanor grabbed the other revolver, the one she'd actually loaded during practice. This time, when she pulled the trigger, the gun fired. The recoil jerked her hands up, the shot going high, catching the young man in the shoulder instead of the chest. He spun, fell against the doorframe. Eleanor shot him again, and again. Kept shooting until the hammer clicked on empty chambers and the young man wasn't moving anymore. She stood there, hands shaking, ears ringing, staring at the second person she'd killed in the space of 2 minutes. The first had been distant, abstract, buckshot erasing a threat before her brain could register it as human. But this one she'd looked in the eyes. This one she'd shot 3 times while he was already dying. This one she'd murdered. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the body. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry." Outside, the gunfire was slowing. Not stopping, it would probably never stop, would echo in Eleanor's ears for the rest of her life. But coming in bursts now instead of a continuous roar. She risked a look through the broken window. Arthur was down again, this time behind an overturned wagon. His left arm hung useless at his side. He was firing one-handed, his right-hand revolver tracking targets with mechanical precision, even as blood pooled beneath him. How he was still conscious, still fighting, Eleanor couldn't understand. He should have been dead 3 times over. Rourke's forces had been cut down. Eleanor counted maybe 15 men still on their feet, and half of those were pinned behind cover by rifle fire from Thomas and the others. Bodies littered the street, some moving, some not. Horses wandered riderless, eyes rolling white with panic. But 15 was still too many, and Arthur was dying. Eleanor reloaded with clumsy fingers, dropping bullets twice before managing to get them into the cylinder. She had 6 shots, 6 chances to make a difference or 6 chances to die trying. She stepped back onto the boardwalk. A bullet splintered wood inches from her head. She flinched, nearly dropped the gun, but held on. Took a breath, found a target. A man crouched behind a barrel, taking aim at Arthur's position. Eleanor shot him, missed. The round kicked up dust 2 feet to his left. The man turned, saw her, smiled, started to stand, bringing his rifle to bear. Eleanor shot again. This time she didn't miss. The man sat down hard, surprise and pain warring on his face. She shot him a 3rd time and he stopped moving. 3 people dead. 3 lives ended because of her. The weight of it should have crushed her, should have sent her screaming back into the saloon to hide until this was all over. Instead, she felt nothing. Just a cold, empty space where emotion should have been. Later, she knew. Later, she'd feel it. Later, she'd break down and sob, and maybe never stop sobbing. But right now, there was only the gun in her hands, and the men trying to kill Arthur, and the mathematical certainty that if she didn't keep shooting, everyone she cared about would die. She found another target, fired, missed, fired again, hit. 4. From the rooftops and windows, Thomas and the others were still fighting. Sam had abandoned his post. Eleanor could see him running through an alley, rifle forgotten, just running. But Thomas held. Jacob held. The others held. Not because they were brave, but because running meant exposing themselves to gunfire, and staying put at least gave them cover. Arthur pushed himself upright against the wagon, swaying. He'd holstered his left-hand revolver. Couldn't use that arm anymore. His right hand held the other gun, but it was shaking badly now, the tremor he'd hidden for so long returning with a vengeance. "Enough!" Rourke's voice cut through the chaos. "Cease fire! Everyone stop shooting!" Gradually, impossibly, the guns went silent. The sudden quiet was more shocking than the noise had been. Eleanor could hear her own breathing, harsh and ragged. Could hear Arthur's labored gasps from 30 feet away. Rourke stepped out from behind his horse, hands raised slightly, making himself visible. Half his men were down. The survivors looked shaken, bloody, nothing like the confident army that had ridden in at dawn. "This is madness," Rourke called out. "Look at us. Look at what we're doing. 10 men dead, maybe more. For what? A saloon? A piece of land? Pride?" Arthur didn't respond. He was using the wagon to stay upright, gun hanging at his side, struggling just to breathe. "I'll make you a deal, Hale," Rourke continued. "New terms. You walk away. Leave Red Hollow. I'll let you go. Let you ride out of here alive. Hell, I'll even pay for a doctor to patch you up. All you have to do is leave and never come back." "And Eleanor," Arthur's voice was barely audible, thick with pain. "She can stay. Keep her saloon. I won't touch her or her property. You have my word." "Your word," Arthur repeated. He almost laughed, but it turned into a cough that brought up blood. "Your word's worth less than the bullets I've wasted on your men." "Then what do you want?" "You're dying, Hale. Can't you see that? You've got minutes, maybe less. You really want to spend them bleeding out in a street defending someone else's property?" Arthur was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft, almost gentle. "I spent 15 years trying to figure out what my life was worth. Tried working honest, tried keeping my head down, tried being invisible. You know what I learned?" Rourke waited. "I learned that a life's not worth the time you spend breathing. It's worth the moments when you choose to stand for something bigger than yourself. When you decide that some things matter more than surviving another day." Arthur straightened slightly, and Eleanor saw him gathering himself for something. "My life's worth exactly one thing right now. It's worth making sure you leave this town alone. So no deals, no walking away, just you and me, Rourke. Right here, right now. You can barely stand." "Don't need to stand to kill you." Arthur raised his revolver. His hand shook like leaves in a storm, but the barrel pointed steady at Rourke's chest. "Your men scatter the moment you go down. You know it. I know it. They're not loyal. They're hired. And hired men don't die for dead employers." Rourke's jaw tightened. "You'll never make the shot. Look at you. You're more dead than alive already." "Probably right," Arthur admitted, "but I've got 6 rounds left. Odds are at least one of them finds you before I go down." "You willing to bet your life on those odds?" For a long moment, Rourke stood frozen. Eleanor could see the calculation happening behind his eyes, weighing his chances, measuring the risk, trying to decide if his pride was worth dying for. Then he drew. Fast. Faster than Eleanor expected. His gun cleared leather in a smooth motion, already rising toward Arthur. Arthur fired. The shot went wide. Eleanor's heart plummeted. The tremor in his hands was too much. He couldn't make the shot. Couldn't do what he'd promised. Rourke's gun leveled. Arthur fired again. Another miss. Rourke smiled, squeezed his trigger. Nothing happened. The hammer fell on an empty chamber with a dry click. Rourke's face went white. He looked down at his gun, realization dawning. In all the chaos, all the shooting, he'd emptied the cylinder without noticing, without reloading. Arthur fired a third time. This shot hit. Caught Rourke high in the chest, spinning him sideways. He staggered, tried to bring his gun back up, realized again it was empty. Started fumbling for the bullets on his belt. Arthur walked forward. Each step looked like it cost him everything, but he kept moving, kept closing the distance. His gun never wavered from Rourke's center mass. "You should have run," Arthur said quietly. "Should have taken your wounded pride and your hired guns and left Red Hollow alone. But you couldn't, because men like you never can. You have to win. Have to prove you're the biggest, the baddest, the one no one can stand against." Rourke got a bullet into his cylinder, fumbled for another. "I used to be like you," Arthur continued. "Thought being the best killer made me the best man. Thought fear and respect were the same thing. Took me 15 years and more corpses than I can count to learn different." Another step closer. Rourke had 2 rounds loaded now, was reaching for a third. "Here's what I learned, Caleb. Fear's not respect, it's just fear. And being the best at killing just makes you the best at dying alone. No one mourns men like us. No one remembers us except as warnings." Rourke snapped his cylinder shut, started to raise the gun. Arthur shot him again. Center mass, perfect aim despite the tremor, despite the blood loss, despite everything. Rourke went down hard. His gun clattered on the wooden boardwalk. Forgotten. He clutched at his chest, breathing in wet gasps. staring up at Arthur with eyes that couldn't quite believe what was happening. "You were right about one thing," Arthur said, standing over him. "I am dying. Been dying for 15 years, just too stubborn to finish it. But at least I'll die knowing I stood for something." "What will you die knowing, Caleb?" Rourke tried to speak. Blood bubbled from his lips. His eyes went distant, unfocused. Then he stopped breathing. Arthur stood there for a long moment, swaying, looking down at the body. Then he turned to face Rourke's remaining men. They stood frozen, guns lowered, staring at their dead leader. "It's over," Arthur said. His voice was fading, each word taking more effort than the last. "Take your wounded, leave your dead, and ride out of Red Hollow. If I ever see any of you again, I won't give warnings. I'll just shoot. We clear?" The men nodded, started backing toward their horses, keeping their hands visible, moving slow. Within minutes, they were mounted and riding east, leaving behind the bodies and the blood and the ruin of Caleb Rourke's ambitions. The street went quiet. Arthur turned toward the saloon, took one step, then another. His gun slipped from his fingers, too heavy to hold. He made it 3 more steps before his legs gave out. Eleanor was already running. She caught him as he fell, easing him down onto the dusty street. His blood soaked through her dress, hot and wet, and there was so much of it. "I got you," she said, even though they both knew she didn't. Couldn't. There was no getting him, no saving him. He was going. "Good shooting," Arthur whispered. His eyes were clouding over, the cold focus fading into something softer. "You did what you had to do. That matters. Don't talk. Save your strength. We'll get you to a doctor. No doctors," Arthur interrupted. "Too late for that. Too late for everything." He coughed, blood flecking his lips. "Eleanor, listen. Important." She leaned closer. "You're going to feel guilty," he said, "for the men you killed. Going to wonder if you're still who you were before. Going to look in mirrors and not recognize yourself." "Arthur, let me finish." His hand found hers, gripped weakly. "You're still you, still Eleanor. What you did wasn't murder, was protection. Big difference. Remember that. When the guilt comes, remember." Thomas appeared, kneeling on Arthur's other side. His hands were shaking, his face pale. "We got a wagon. We can move him to the church, get him somewhere." "No point," Arthur said. "I'm done. Just let me see the sky. Let me go looking at something besides ceilings and blood." They stayed there, Eleanor and Thomas and the other men who'd survived, kneeling in the street around a dying legend who'd never wanted to be legendary. The sun was climbing higher now, burning off the morning haze. It was going to be a beautiful day, clear and warm and completely indifferent to the violence that had stained its beginning. "Did we win?" Arthur asked. His voice was barely a whisper now. "Yeah," Eleanor said, tears cutting tracks through the dust on her face. "We won." "Good. That's good." His eyes found hers. "Take care of this place. Red Hollow. Need someone who'll stand. Someone who remembers that land's worth defending, but people are worth more." "I will," Eleanor promised. "I'll take care of it." Arthur smiled. "Knew you would. You're stronger than you think." "Always were." His breathing was slowing, each inhale coming later than the last, shallower. Eleanor wanted to scream at him to hold on, to fight, to be the impossible thing he'd been his whole life. But she could see it in his eyes. He was tired of fighting, tired of carrying the weight of decades of violence, tired of being grave hand Hale. "Catherine would be proud," he whispered. "Thought I'd never earn that. But maybe I finally did." His eyes closed. "Arthur?" Eleanor squeezed his hand. "Arthur, stay with me, please." But he was already gone, slipped away quiet like he'd always wanted to. No drama, no last words of wisdom. Just an old man dying in the street he'd defended, surrounded by people who'd remember him as more than a collection of bodies and a name whispered in fear. Eleanor sat there holding his hand long after it had gone cold, crying for the man who'd saved her twice. Once with guns, once with the simple act of showing her what strength actually looked like. Around her, the town began to wake. People emerging from the caves, from hiding places, cautious at first, and then rushing forward when they saw the bodies, the blood, the evidence of violence they'd fled instead of facing. Thomas stood, placed a hand on Eleanor's shoulder. "Come on," he said gently. We need to bury the dead. Start cleaning up. He wouldn't want you sitting here when there's work to do." Eleanor nodded. Let Thomas help her to her feet. She looked down at Arthur one last time, at his peaceful face, at the blood that had drained from him into the thirsty earth. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." Then she turned and walked back to the Brass Bell Saloon, back to the work of living that Arthur had bought her with his death. Behind her, the men began the grim task of collecting bodies, of sorting the dead from the dying, of trying to make sense of a morning that had started as an army and ended as a massacre. Red Hollow had survived, but it would wear the scars of this day forever. They buried Arthur Hale on a hillside overlooking Red Hollow, in a spot where the morning sun came early and the evening light lingered late. Eleanor chose the place herself, far enough from town that he could have the peace he'd craved, close enough that she could visit when the guilt got too heavy to carry alone. Thomas and Jacob dug the grave while Eleanor sat on a rock nearby, watching the town below. Smoke still rose from where the boarding house had caught fire during the fight. 3 buildings had burned before they'd gotten the flames under control. The street was stained dark, where blood had pooled and dried. It would take months to scrub away the evidence of violence. Years, maybe. Some stains went deeper than wood. "You should say something," Thomas said when the hole was deep enough. "Few words. He deserves that much." Eleanor stood, walked to the edge of the grave. They'd wrapped Arthur in a clean blanket, the best they could do on short notice. His guns lay beside him, wrapped in the same oilcloth he'd kept them in for 15 years. She'd thought about keeping them, but it felt wrong. They belonged to him, had always belonged to him. Let them rest together. "I didn't know him long," Eleanor said. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, flat, empty of the emotion that should have been there. 3 years, give or take. And for most of that time, I thought he was just an old man who swept floors and drank coffee and didn't cause trouble. Shows how much I knew. She paused, searching for words that felt true instead of pretty. "Arthur told me once that a life's not worth the time you spend breathing. It's worth the moments when you choose to stand for something bigger than yourself." I think he was right. I think he spent 15 years trying to prove it to himself, and one morning proving it to the rest of us. She looked down at the wrapped body. "I hope wherever he is now, he knows he succeeded. Hope he found Catherine again. Hope she forgave him for what he became and loved him for what he tried to be." Thomas and the others lowered the body into the ground. The sound of dirt hitting the blanket was final, in a way Eleanor wasn't ready for. Each shovelful felt like erasing him, like burying not just a man, but the idea that anyone could change, could become better than their worst moments. By the time they finished, the sun was directly overhead. Eleanor stood there until the others had gone back to town, until she was alone with a mound of fresh earth and the weight of everything that had happened. "I killed 4 men yesterday," she said to the grave. "Maybe 5. I'm not sure if that first one with the shotgun counts as one person or just pieces. Doesn't matter, I guess. 4 or 5, the number doesn't change what it means." The wind moved through the grass, carrying the smell of dust and distant rain. "I thought I'd feel more," Eleanor continued. "Thought I'd break down, fall apart, become someone who couldn't function. But I just feel tired. Like I used up all my emotions in those few minutes, and there's nothing left now. Is that normal? Is that what happened to you after the first few times?" No answer, just wind and grass and the endless sky. "You told me I'd still be me after. That what I did was protection, not murder. I want to believe that, I do. But when I close my eyes, I see their faces. The young one in the doorway, looking surprised when I shot him. The one behind the barrel who smiled at me right before I pulled the trigger. They're stuck in my head now, living there. And I don't know if that makes me a killer or just someone who did what killers do and hates herself for it." She sat down on the grave, ignoring how wrong it felt, ignoring everything except the need to be close to someone who might understand. "The town's calling me a hero," she said. "Can you believe that? Eleanor Voss, the woman who stood against Caleb Rourke, the woman who fought when everyone else ran. They're telling stories already, making it sound brave instead of desperate, making it sound like I had a choice. A hawk circled overhead, riding thermals Eleanor couldn't see. But I did have a choice, didn't I? Could have run, could have sold the saloon and left Red Hollow to burn, could have chosen life over land like you told those farmers to do, but I stayed, and now 4 men are dead because I couldn't let go of a building James built. Was it worth it, Arthur? Was any of this worth it? The question hung in the air, unanswered and maybe unanswerable. Eleanor stood, brushed dirt from her dress. The fabric was still stiff with Arthur's blood. She should have changed, should have washed, should have done 100 things differently, but she was here instead, talking to a grave like it could absolve her. I'm going to try, she said finally, going to try to be what you said. Someone who stands. Someone who protects this place without becoming what we fought against. Don't know if I can do it. Don't know if anyone can. But I owe it to you to try. Owe it to James. Owe it to those 4 men whose faces I'll see every time I close my eyes. She turned and walked back toward town, leaving Arthur to his hillside and his peace. Behind her, the mound of earth settled in the sun, unremarkable except for what it held. Red Hollow was different when she got back. The families had returned from the caves, filling the streets with noise and life. Children ran between buildings, too young to understand what had happened, or too resilient to let it stop them. Women swept broken glass from boardwalks. Men hammered boards over bullet holes, trying to patch the visible damage while ignoring the invisible kind that would take years to heal. Thomas met her outside the brass bell. Town council wants to talk to you, he said. They're meeting at the church in an hour. Council? We have a council? As of about 20 minutes ago, yeah. Figured we needed some kind of organization, some way to make decisions now that... He trailed off, unwilling to say the obvious. Now that Caleb Rourke's dead and the people who ran are looking for someone to follow. Eleanor wanted to refuse, wanted to walk into the saloon, lock the door, and spend the next week scrubbing blood from floorboards until her hands were raw and her mind was too tired to remember. But Arthur's voice echoed in her head. Take care of this place, needs someone who'll stand. And she found herself nodding. 1 hour, she said. I need to clean up first. The church was packed when Eleanor arrived. Every seat filled, people standing along the walls, crammed together in a space meant for Sunday worship, not town governance. They went quiet when she walked in, all eyes turning toward her with an expectation she didn't know how to meet. Pastor Williams stood at the front, looking uncomfortable in his new role as moderator. Thank you for coming, Mrs. Voss. Please have a seat. Eleanor sat in the front pew, feeling exposed under the weight of so many stares. She'd changed clothes, washed Arthur's blood from her skin, but she could still feel it, sticky and warm and accusatory. We'll keep this brief, Williams said. The council has been discussing Red Hollow's future. What happened yesterday, the battle, the deaths, it can't happen again. We need laws, structure, protection, and we need someone to enforce those things. We have a sheriff, Eleanor said. Had a sheriff, Jacob Morse corrected from his seat. He rode out this morning, took his badge and his cowardice and left. Can't say I blame him. Man was bought and paid for by Rourke anyway. Good riddance. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Which brings us to our proposal, Williams continued. We'd like you to take the position, Mrs. Voss. Town sheriff. You've proven you can stand against threats. Proven you'll fight when fighting's necessary. The people trust you. Eleanor stared at him. You want me to be sheriff? I don't know the first thing about law enforcement. I run a saloon, not a jail. You killed 4 of Rourke's men, someone called from the back. That's more law enforcement than our last sheriff ever managed. Uncomfortable laughter. Eleanor felt sick. I'm not a killer, she said quietly. What I did yesterday, that wasn't law enforcement. That was survival. There's a difference. Is there? Thomas stood up, turned to face the crowd. Seems to me survival and law enforcement are the same thing out here. We're not San Francisco. We don't have courts and lawyers and proper procedures. We've got dust and desperation and people trying to take what's ours. Someone needs to stand between us and them. And yesterday you proved you could be that someone. By killing, Eleanor said. By shooting men who might have had families, might have had reasons for what they did. You want me to do that again? Make those choices? Live with those faces? We want you to protect us, Williams said gently. However that looks. If it means shooting, then shoot. If it means talking, then talk. We trust your judgment, Eleanor. That's worth more than any badge. Eleanor looked around the room, saw hope and fear mixed in equal measure on the faces staring back at her. They wanted her to be strong so they didn't have to be. Wanted her to carry the weight so they could sleep easier. It was the same thing they'd wanted from Arthur, someone to stand in front of danger while they hid behind. And maybe that was okay. Maybe that's what communities were. People with different strengths supporting each other, carrying different loads. Eleanor could shoot, even if she hated it, could make hard choices, even if they broke something inside her. Maybe that was worth something. I'll do it, she said, but on one condition. Name it, William said. We form a real council, not just for emergencies, but permanent. 5 people elected by the town to make decisions together. I'll enforce those decisions, but I won't make them alone. I'm not a dictator. I'm not Caleb Rourke. I'm just someone who'll do what's necessary to keep people safe. Williams looked at the crowd, saw nods and murmurs of approval. Agreed, he said. We'll hold elections next Sunday. Until then, the existing council will serve. Is that acceptable? It's acceptable. They gave her the badge there in the church, pinning it to her chest while people clapped and cheered like this was a celebration instead of a funeral for whoever she'd been before yesterday. Eleanor stood there feeling the weight of it, not the physical weight, which was negligible, but the weight of responsibility, of trust, of expectations she wasn't sure she could meet. After the meeting, she walked back to the brass bell alone. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that reminded her too much of fire, of blood, of violence she'd never asked for but had embraced anyway. Inside the saloon, she stood behind the bar James had carved by hand, ran her fingers over the smooth wood, feeling the grain, the imperfections, the places where his tools had slipped and left marks. This place had cost her everything, her husband's life, her innocence, her peace. But it had also given her something. Purpose, maybe. Or just proof that some things were worth defending, even when defending them cost more than you could afford. She poured herself a whiskey, raised the glass toward the empty room. To James, she said, who died believing land mattered, and to Arthur, who died proving that sometimes it does, and to the 4 men I killed, whose names I'll never know. I hope you're all somewhere better than this. Hope you're somewhere that makes sense of the violence, because down here, it never does. She drank. The whiskey burned, clean and honest. The weeks that followed were a blur of work and grief and the slow, painful process of building something new from the ruins of what had been. Eleanor wore the badge and learned what it meant, breaking up fights, settling disputes, standing in as judge when no real judge was available. She hated most of it, hated the power people gave her, the way they looked to her for answers she didn't have. But she did it anyway, because Arthur had been right about one thing. Some positions needed filling whether you wanted to fill them or not. The nightmares came every night like clockwork. 4 faces in the darkness, looking surprised or angry or scared. Sometimes they spoke to her, asked her why. Sometimes they just stared. Eleanor never had good answers for them. Just the same broken explanation. You were trying to kill me or someone I cared about, and I chose me over you. It wasn't personal. It was just survival. The faces never seemed satisfied with that answer. Neither was Eleanor. 3 months after the battle, a stranger rode into Red Hollow asking questions about Gravehand Hale. He was young, maybe 25, with the kind of eager cruelty in his eyes that said he was looking to make a reputation by standing on someone else's grave. Eleanor met him in the street, hand resting on the revolver at her hip. One of Arthur's revolvers, she'd retrieved them from his grave a week after the burial, unable to let them stay buried when she needed them more. He's dead, she told the stranger. Died defending this town. You want to test yourself against his legend? You'll have to dig him up first. The stranger looked her up and down, taking in the badge, the gun, the flat expression that said she'd already killed and would do it again if necessary. You're the one they're talking about, he said. The woman who killed Rourke's men. They say you're fast. They're wrong, Eleanor replied. I'm not fast. I'm just willing. There's a difference. And right now I'm willing to put a bullet in you if you don't turn around and ride out of here. The stranger smiled. Big talk from a saloon owner playing sheriff. You're right, it is big talk. But I've killed 4 men already. What's one more? She met his eyes, let him see the truth there. That she meant it, that she'd pull the trigger without hesitation if he pushed her. Question is whether you're worth the nightmares. Because I'll be honest, I don't sleep well as it is. Adding another face to the collection doesn't appeal to me, but I'll do it anyway if that's what it takes to protect this town." The stranger held her gaze for a long moment. Then he laughed, shook his head, turned his horse around. "Not worth it," he said. "Town full of farmers and a sheriff with dead eyes. No glory in that." He rode away, and Eleanor stood in the street until he disappeared. Then she went back to the saloon, poured herself a drink, and tried not to think about how close she'd come to killing a fifth person over nothing but pride and reputation. That night, she visited Arthur's grave again. It was something she did often now, especially after days when the weight got too heavy to carry alone. "I almost killed someone today," she told the mound of earth. "Young kid looking to make a name. I would have done it too. Would have shot him just for pushing, just for not backing down. That's what I've become, Arthur. Someone who reaches for a gun before reaching for words. Someone who sees threats everywhere and responds with violence." The wind carried her words away into the darkness. "Is this what you meant?" Eleanor asked. "When you said I'd still be me? Because I don't feel like me anymore. I feel like someone wearing my face, playing a role I never auditioned for. The woman who runs the brass bell wouldn't have threatened that kid, wouldn't have been willing to kill him over nothing. But Sheriff Voss? Sheriff Voss would have put him down without blinking." She sat on the grave, pulling her knees to her chest. "Maybe that's the lesson," she said. "Maybe we're all just playing roles, becoming what we need to be to survive. You played the broken old man so well, you almost believed it yourself. I'm playing the strong sheriff who doesn't break, who doesn't cry, who does what needs doing. And maybe if we play the roles long enough, they become real. Maybe there's no difference between pretending to be something and actually being it." A shooting star streaked across the sky, brief and bright and gone. "I miss you," Eleanor whispered. "Miss having someone who understood the weight. Miss having someone I could be weak around. Everyone in town looks at me like I'm made of iron now. Like I don't hurt, don't doubt, don't wake up screaming from dreams of men I killed. But I do, every night. And I don't know how to stop." Years passed. The nightmares never went away, but Eleanor learned to live with them. Learned to function on 4 hours of sleep. Learned to carry the weight of those 4 faces without letting it crush her completely. Red Hollow grew, slowly, cautiously, but it grew. New families arrived, drawn by stories of a town that had stood against evil and won. They built homes, opened businesses, planted crops in soil that had been watered with blood. The brass bell became the center of town life again. Eleanor ran it during the day, enforced the law when necessary, and spent her evenings serving drinks to people who never asked about the darkness in her eyes. They called her Sheriff Voss now, even when she was behind the bar. The woman she'd been before, James's widow, the frightened saloon owner, had been buried along with the men who'd made her into something else. Thomas Bridger became her deputy, though neither of them used the title. He just helped when help was needed, stood beside her when standing alone felt impossible. He never asked about the nightmares, never pushed her to talk when silence was easier. He'd killed 2 men during the battle and wore his own scars where no one could see them. "You think it gets easier?" he asked her once, late at night when the saloon was empty and the whiskey was flowing. "No," Eleanor said, "but you get stronger, learn to carry it better. That's not the same as easier, but it's something. Is it worth it, what we did?" Eleanor thought about that. Thought about the children playing in streets that would have been ruled by Caleb Rourke's men if they hadn't stood. Thought about the families sleeping safe in homes they owned instead of rented from a tyrant. Thought about the price paid for that safety. Arthur's life, 4 men's deaths, the pieces of herself she'd never get back. "I don't know," she said finally. "Ask me again in 10 years. Maybe by then I'll have an answer that doesn't feel like a lie." 10 years came and went. Eleanor never found that answer. But she found something else, a way to live that didn't require justification. She protected Red Hollow not because it made her feel good or washed away the blood on her hands. She did it because someone had to, and she was someone. That was enough. Had to be enough. Because the alternative was giving up, and she'd come too far to quit now. The badge became part of her, worn smooth by years of wear. The revolver stayed at her hip, fired occasionally in defense, but more often just present as a reminder, to herself and others, of what she was capable of when pushed. She never drew first, never threatened unless threatened, but when violence came, she met it with the same cold efficiency Arthur had taught her. People said she was hard, Said she'd lost the softness that made Eleanor Voss human and become something closer to machine. Maybe they were right. Eleanor didn't know anymore. Didn't know where the woman ended and the sheriff began. Didn't know if there was even a difference worth measuring. What she knew was this: Red Hollow survived. Thrived, even. And if that required someone to carry the darkness so others could live in light, then she'd carry it. Would carry it until the weight finally crushed her, or until someone stronger came along to take the burden. Whichever came first. 15 years after the battle, Eleanor stood at Arthur's grave for what would be the last time. She was older now, worn down by years of hard choices and harder nights. Her hair had gone gray, lines carved deep around her eyes and mouth. The faces in her nightmares had been joined by others, men she'd killed in defense of the town, threats she'd ended before they could grow into catastrophes. She'd lost count somewhere around 12. Stopped counting. Counting made them real in a way she couldn't afford. "I'm dying," she told the grave. "Doc says I've got maybe 6 months. Cancer, eating through me from the inside. Fitting, I suppose. All that poison I swallowed over the years has to go somewhere." The hillside was peaceful, unchanged except for the weathering of Arthur's marker. Someone had planted wildflowers around it. Eleanor suspected Thomas, though he'd never admitted it. "I wanted to tell you that I understand now. What you meant about lives being worth the moments when you stand for something bigger. I've spent 15 years standing, Arthur. 15 years protecting this place. And you know what? I still don't know if it was worth it. Still see those faces every night. Still wonder if I'm a protector or just a killer with better excuses." She lowered herself carefully onto the grass, bones protesting. "But I also know this. Red Hollow's alive because we stood. Because you taught me that some things matter more than comfort, more than peace, more than keeping your hands clean. Hundreds of people have lived good lives here because we were willing to do bad things to bad people. Is that worth 4 nightmares? Worth dying with blood on your conscience? I don't know. I honestly don't know." Eleanor pulled one of Arthur's revolvers from her hip, held it up to catch the afternoon light. "I'm leaving these to Thomas," she said. "Along with the badge. He's earned it, earned the right to carry the weight. Maybe he'll do better than I did. Maybe he won't let it eat him alive from the inside. Or maybe he'll end up just like us, broken but standing, surviving but not quite living." She set the gun on the grave, ran her fingers over the smooth grip one last time. "Thank you," she said, "for showing me what strength looks like, for teaching me that choosing to fight isn't the same as choosing to become a monster, for proving that even killers can find redemption or at least die trying. I hope I made you proud. Hope when I see you again, if there's a place where people like us go, you'll tell me I did okay, that I carried the weight without dropping it. That's all I've ever wanted to hear." Eleanor stood, joints crackling in protest. She looked down at Red Hollow, at the town she'd bled for, killed for, slowly died for. It looked good from up here, peaceful, alive. The opposite of everything it had been that morning when 30 men rode in looking for blood. She thought about James, buried in the town cemetery with a marker that called him a hero. Thought about the 4 men whose names she'd eventually learned, whose families she'd tried to compensate with money that could never buy back what she'd taken. Thought about Arthur, lying beneath her feet, finally at peace after a lifetime of running from it. And she thought about herself. Eleanor Voss, saloon owner and sheriff, protector and killer, someone who'd learned that strength and violence weren't opposites but often uncomfortable companions. Someone who'd discovered that you could do terrible things for good reasons and still have to live with both the terrible and the good. "I choose to believe it mattered," she said to no one in particular. "Choose to believe that standing was better than running, fighting was better than hiding, becoming something hard was better than staying soft and letting evil win. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe in the end we're all just making excuses for the violence we commit. But I'm dying either way, and I'd rather die believing I mattered than believing I was just another killer in a long line of killers." She turned and walked down the hillside, back toward town. Behind her, Arthur's grave sat in the afternoon sun, silent and still, and holding secrets only the dead could keep. The wildflowers moved in the wind, and somewhere overhead a hawk cried out, hunting. Eleanor Voss died 6 months later, quietly in her sleep, surrounded by people who called her a hero and never knew about the nightmares. They buried her next to James, gave her a marker that praised her courage and service. The whole town turned out for the funeral, telling stories about the woman who'd saved Red Hollow, who'd stood when standing meant everything. Thomas Bridger took the badge and the guns and the weight that came with both. He wore them the same way Eleanor had, not proudly, but necessarily. And on quiet nights, when the darkness pressed too close, he'd ride up to that hillside and talk to the two people who'd taught him what it meant to stand. Red Hollow survived. Built laws and structures and systems that meant fewer people had to become killers to protect what they loved. The violence faded into history, became stories told by grandparents to wide-eyed children who couldn't imagine their peaceful town had ever been anything else. But on that hillside, two graves sat side by side. One belonged to a legend who'd tried to die unknown. The other belonged to a woman who'd never wanted to be legendary but became it anyway. And if you visited on certain mornings when the light hit just right, you could almost see them, two ghosts standing together, looking down at what they'd protected, wondering if the cost had been worth it. The answer, like most honest answers, was complicated. They'd saved lives by taking them, protected peace through violence, became monsters to fight monsters, and spent their remaining years trying to figure out if that made them heroes or just better monsters. Red Hollow didn't care about the distinction. The town thrived, built on a foundation of blood and sacrifice, and two people who'd chosen to stand when standing meant losing pieces of themselves they'd never get back. And maybe that was enough. Maybe that was all anyone could ask. Not perfection, not purity, but the willingness to do what was necessary and spend the rest of your life wrestling with whether necessary was the same as right. Eleanor and Arthur never found that answer, but they'd lived and died trying, and in the end, the trying mattered more than the answer ever could. The wind moved through the grass on that hillside, carrying whispers of violence and redemption, of choices made and prices paid. And Red Hollow lived on, built on the backs of flawed people who'd done their best with impossible choices. It was enough. It had to be enough. Because perfect heroes don't exist outside stories. Real heroes are just broken people who stand when everyone else runs, who carry weight that crushes them slowly, who choose the hard path because someone has to walk it. Eleanor Voss and Arthur Hale were those people, and Red Hollow, thriving, peaceful, alive, was their legacy. Complicated and blood-stained and worth every terrible thing it cost to build. That was the only truth that mattered in the end.